Hi, it's Craig. We're going to talk about DMR encryption capable radio equipment. Now, I have briefly mentioned this before, but we're going to look at it in a bit more detail. If you haven't seen the previous videos, they're available on YouTube and other places. I will be probably uploading them to LinkedIn as well. Right, let's start. So, your radio supplier told you that your radios are encrypted. They might even be right. But there's a difference between a radio that can do encryption and a radio that is doing encryption. And most businesses and schools have the first one without the second. In fact, I've seen worse at schools because a lot of them go for these cheap analog license-free radios. They're extremely easy to eavesdrop on. I'm Craig, and this is the single biggest wireless security gap that I find when I've looked at business operations on business sites. DMR stands for Digital Mobile Radio. It is the most widely used digital radio standard in UK businesses. For those of you old enough, you could think of it as the VHS of two-way radio. VHS being a standard video cassette recorders used back when the video cassette recorders were popular. It was the dominant standard. So DMR is the two-way radio, what VHS was to video recorders. The most popular and most supported standard. So let's just recap that. So DMR stands for Digital Mobile Radio. It's the most widely used digital radio standard in UK businesses. Warehouses, logistics, security, manufacturing and construction. If you use professional radios, you're probably using DMR. DMR was designed primarily for voice clarity and spectrum efficiency. Security was an afterthought. The standard supports two types of encryption: basic and enhanced. Basic encryption is weak and it can be broken easily. Enhanced encryption uses AES 256. That's the same standard used by governments and banks. AES 256 is genuinely strong. If it's configured correctly, your voice traffic will then be secure. Here's the problem though. Encryption on a DMR radio has to be licensed separately. It's usually an add-on that you get enabled on that radio in most cases. It has to be programmed into the code plug. The code plug basically being the piece of customized software which you program on a laptop and upload into the radio. It has to be programmed into the code plug. That's the configuration file that controls what the radio does, as I just explained. It has to be enabled on every individual channel, and the encryption key has to be the same across all radios on that channel. If any one of those steps isn't done, the radio transmits in the clear. In other words, not encrypted. And most businesses never had those steps completed when their system was installed. In fact, I've seen some shocking things in the past, but that's for another time. The radio supplier hands over the kit. The customer assumes it's secure. It isn't. Despite what the advertising, and you've got to love these marketing types, what they may have given the impression in the marketing blurb, it's not secure. Because it hasn't been set up properly, if it has the option. So how do you know if your radio is actually encrypted? First, check for a padlock icon on the radio display, if your radio has a display. When you transmit, that indicates encryption is active, though not all radios have that. If you need some advice, I'm here to help. Second, ask your supplier for the code plug and look for encryption settings on each channel. yeah, I've said that, but actually, in reality, if you're a business, probably, I wrote that on the script, but probably not a good idea to just, even if the supplier will give you the code plug, to be playing around with it yourself, because there's a lot of settings and a lot of ways of getting this wrong. So if you need to use a reputable supplier, don't have to be me, don't have to be Yesway, whoever, and you need to have that conversation with them about encryption. So, as your supplier is encrypted. Third, use a software-defined radio. Right, now, let's just go back a bit. Oh, I've messed this up, haven't I?